talking about the next big thing. Where are we? Yes, that's indeed. I should hopefully be able to talk about this because not only have I got to talk about this, my company consultancy is also called The Next Big Thing, and I've written a book on trend forecasting called The Next Big Thing, so hopefully I should know a bit about that by now. My job is to work with a range of clients and help them understand what their customers are likely to be wanting, to be thinking, to be doing, where they're going to like to be going, what they're demanding in the future, over the next year, 2 years, 5 years, even up to 10 years sometimes. And I do that across industries, so I work with clients from media companies like the BBC and MTV, through to technology companies like Telefonica, like Siemens, financial companies like HSBC, because clearly the same consumer that maybe banks with HSBC also drinks Budweiser, also watches MTV or BBC and so on. So it's very much focused on the consumer. What are they likely to do? What are they likely to want from you as a brand? So we're talking very much about the future. What are they likely to be like in the future? And when I was talking to Michael about what I was going to speak about, we agreed there are going to be a lot of people talking about the future of the industry, which has been done brilliantly today, I think. We thought it'd be nice to finish really with a focus on the future of the consumer. So that's what I'm going to be looking at now, trying to paint, if I can, a portrait of tomorrow's consumer, how they're likely to think, how they're likely to feel, to behave, where they're likely to go, what they're going to want, what will drive purchase, trust, loyalty, and so on. Now, a couple of quick things before I go on. Probably won't be time for questions, although I'll be around later on and at dinner, so do ask me then. But if there's anything you want to say, to comment on, positive or negative, then do get in touch on Twitter, Next Big Thing Co, at Next Big Thing Co. The other thing to say is, obviously, it's an incredibly diverse audience. So not only are you working across many, many different industries in terms of your clients, but also, obviously, we've got something like, 20 different markets represented here, which is phenomenal. So what I'm trying to do with these trends today is to talk about trends that really cut across borders, that cut across internationally. So I'll try and be talking about mainly trends that will actually be impacting your territories over the next few years. And what's lucky about that, really, to an extent, is increasingly trends are actually working across borders. We're seeing trends which are starting in one country being picked up much faster now than they used to be in other countries, and trends that are cutting across the globe much more so now. I mean, whether it's fixed gear bikes that starts off in New York, goes to Europe, then back to Latin America, salsa now big in Shanghai, Italian coffee bars starting to take off in India, French bread apparently in Russia now. So lots of things like this spreading across the globe. So we're going to be talking about trends, as I say, of the consumer, what the consumer is going to want, preferably across the globe if we can. So how do we work that out? Well, obviously there's no guarantees when I'm trying to predict what the consumer's likely to do, but I've got a system which seems to work, and it makes logical sense. If you understand what's influencing the consumer now, then to an extent you can start thinking, well, what's likely to motivate them? And then from there, well, if you know what's going to motivate them, you can sort of understand how they're likely to behave, what they're likely to want. So that's what I'm going to try and talk through today. So initially, what are the influences? What's likely to drive motivation for consumer? Then what are those motivations? What is it that will drive behaviors? And then finally, what might some of those behaviors be? Okay, so let's start. What are the influences? Starting, I suppose, really typically the pest or pestel categories, really, isn't it? It's global politics. What's happening out there in terms of politics, society, and so on? Well, it's very unstable. That's clearly one of the things that's impacting people. We've got unstable political climate. Consumers, therefore, always it's all very volatile. They're always on orange alert in terms of politics. They're wary of the future. Globalized markets means that, whatever happens, it's impacting the rest of the world. Big business, there's a distrust of big business. Again, people are feeling it's out of their control. Businesses and companies and countries are doing things that are out of their control. The environment, global warming, again, it's out of the consumer's control. So these are influences that are impacting them. The economy, again, to a great extent, certainly in the broader terms, out of a consumer's control. They're having to focus very much now on saving money. And actually, it's made them very, very savvy. And they're starting to worry about the future more and more. And so, whatever whether the recession or the economy has actually impacted you or not, it's likely for you to fear that you might lose your job tomorrow. So they're thinking and more wary of the future. Technology giving us greater efficiency, enabling us more and more, giving us more of that in that sense. More data, greater product turnover, and so on. Filings to the European Patent Office now have reached a record high. Constant connection. So positives and negatives there. So lots more empowerment, technological empowerment. The mobile phone enables us to do lots of things, but also, at the same time, a lot of data. So those are three classic sort of pest influences on the consumer, and those are likely to continue for the next several years. But one that sometimes gets forgotten about with pest is, of course, happiness. It's something that drives us constantly. We're constantly thinking, well, what do we want? What will make us happy? Increasingly important. Again, if you talk to people, it's funny, you'd have thought in an economic downturn, people would just care about money, but actually no, they're starting to care more and more about comfort, about maintaining stability, about maintaining security. Those are the things that are increasingly making them happy. So those are the influences. Those are some likely to be the key influences, certainly at the moment, and moving through, as I say, for the next several years. So what does that mean? What motivation, then, will that give the consumer? Well, the first thing is consumers are going to want to do things that provide them with value. They're going to want products, services, behaviors that provide value. Obviously, first thing about that is cheapness. They want things to be cheap. They want price. They're thinking about budgeting. It's all about, the comparison shopping and so on. They're thinking more and more about products that are free. What can they get out of that? Sharing more and more products, whether that's from neighbors sharing products increasingly to car sharing. So sharing increasing. So all of these sorts of things are coming through. Yes, they're seeking cheapness and good value on that level. But it's not just about cheapness. As I say, this is a savvy consumer. Those influences have made them much, much more savvy. So they're thinking more about value for money. Not just how cheap something is, but will it offer them security? Is it good quality? Will it last? Is there some form, is it robust? We're now thinking more and more about that. The quality, if you're buying clothes, we've seen with fast fashion, it's not as important anymore. Now people will want, yes, fast fashion's great for some of the throwaway items, but if you're buying a coat, you're going to want to think about the robustness. You're going to want to think about quality. You won't just go for the cheapest. So people will pay for good quality increasingly now. They'll pay for privacy. They'll pay for safe storage. The amount of data that we have, as everything's becoming more and more virtual, increasingly they'll be willing to pay for something that stores their conversations, their virtual products, and so on, safely. But also we're seeing that consumers are more and more happy to pay for convenience. So they're things which are frictionless, things which are compatible. The consumer increasingly wants to be comfortable. As I say, they want, in America, the number one the number one factor in choosing your financial services brand is how convenient it is. Not returns, not money, nothing financial. It's how convenient that bank makes your working on finances. So that's what's driving it. Convenience now increasingly important. We've got a very stressful world. We want to feel convenient. So that's the first motive, looking for value of some sort. What is it that might give me value? I'll take that. But next thing, seeking control. We've already said little influence over events, whether it's global warming, whether it's terrorist attacks, whether it's the machinations of people's eyes of big business. And they're declining. Their trust in institutions is declining. There's less trust there. So again, they don't feel they have control over institutions. They're not trusting them to take control of their lives as much. And also, as I said, because looking at those influences, there's a fear of what's to come in the future, a fear of the future. So for all of these reasons, increasingly we're seeing consumers wanting things that will enable them to take control of their lives in some way, to take control in the short term. And that can be control of purchasing. So we're seeing them comparing products more and more, so finding ways to purchase themselves. Taking care of their own finances. Partly it's been brought through, we've seen online banking has made people feel they can take more control. It's less about this big box over there where all my money is. It's actually more I can start taking control. Taking control of skills, of their career. I mean, on the huge rise in entrepreneurism, which doesn't look likely to change at all, it looks like it's still going to continue growing. The reason that people are taking on entrepreneurialism and people are starting their own companies is because they wanted to take control of their career. They don't want to be dependent on the economy to decide whether they've got a job or not, for their boss to decide whether they have a job. So entrepreneurism coming through there. In terms of health, we've talked a lot today about the Nike Fuel Band. Actually, 27% of Americans now monitor their health via technology. And almost as many, 1 in 5, have some form of health app. So again, not relying on doctors, but doing things themselves. So anything that enables, and Eric made some great points earlier, this idea of a brand that enables, a brand that helps you, hugely important. Those are the brands you'll go to. Not as much, as I say, the love brands, but the brands that enable, the brands that help you help yourself. And we're seeing this idea of taking control across the board, whether it's more independent travel in Russia or Britain's increasingly building their own homes. So we'll see this coming through in terms of skills, again, adult learning on the increase across so many different markets now. And in fact, 51% of millennials agree that being able to customize an item makes them more willing to purchase. Customizing, personalizing, these are things you're taking control of. You want to take control of that. And actually, it's interesting, this is definitely one of the characteristics of this next generation. We have a generation coming through, people don't seem to have named it. I'm going to name it, I'll certainly name it for today, the recession generation. I think we should name our generations around what's the defining characteristics. So baby boomers, they were part of the baby boom. So there was a huge number of them. So they had a sense of empowerment, a sense that they could do something special as a generation. That's the boomers. Generation X, it was the idea of a generation that didn't have a defining feature. The X meant nothing, whatever you want it to mean. Then we had the millennials who grew up around that very volatile period around the millennium. Now, let's not call them this next generation, Gen Y or anything. This is a generation that has grown up, really come of age around the recession. That's had a huge impact. They've not been allowed whatever they want at any point they want it. So this is a generation that has been impacted massively by the recession. And this idea of taking control of their own lives is something we're going to see more and more of. This generation currently in their, pre-teens and teens, maybe early 20s. They'll come through more and more, taking control of what they want to do. They know now, this generation, that nobody is going to do anything for them. They understand that, so they're going to do it themselves. So what have been the influences going up? I thought I'd just take a moment, as I say, to come out of this and just to talk about this generation. So, influences growing up, paranoid parenting, the idea of safety, constantly being told you need to be safe. Parental hedonism to a great extent, a generation of parents that are happy to keep going out, that don't suddenly settle down. And the recession, as I said, had a huge impact. That's created a mindset amongst this generation of greater fear, of less hedonism. Despite what some of the lurid tabloids say, across the globe, the younger generation now is drinking less, is taking fewer recreational drugs. Binge drinking, cannabis smoking among German and Dutch teens has almost halved in the last decade. 50% of women in Japan drink less than they did 5 years ago. Drink, drugs, and teen pregnancies has fallen year on year in the US and the UK. This is not a hedonistic generation. This is a generation that's very self-controlled, that wants to get on, that's got this sense of fear. And they're spending less. They're quite a smart generation in terms of, and quite a savvy generation in terms of finance. Less spending. We're already seeing this idea of kind of living for today, the idea of the teenager that lives for today. That's what we all did as teenagers. But less so, the statement, I like to enjoy life and don't worry about the future. You'd have thought a sort of statement every teenager would enjoy. I like to enjoy life and don't worry about the future. But less than a quarter of teenagers across the globe agree with that statement. And in fact, over 1 in 10 under 30s think that saving for a pension is important. This is people under 30. When I was growing up, believe me, I was not thinking about a pension under 30. In fact, it's only slightly smaller percentage than adults in their 50s, 60s, 70s are thinking about them. So, as I say, this is a generation that is less hedonistic, less spending. So what will we see from them tomorrow? Going to be planning more, going to be more serious, going to be saving more. This is the generation we have coming through. Who knows exactly where they're going to go? It's hard to predict the entire generation, but this suggests we are going to see perhaps a return to a more conservative, small c conservative generation, perhaps. It's a third reference to Margaret Thatcher today, actually, interestingly. Maybe there's something in the air. Right, motive number 3, back to the motives. There are only 4 motives, 4 key motives. What are they going to be doing? They're going to be seeking a sense of belonging. In the midst of all of this volatility that we've seen, this idea that there are things you can't really do much about, this changing technology, changing economy from day to day, one thing the young and old share is a desire to find their roots, to find something to hang on to. If you're being buffeted around, you want to hang on to something safe. So the idea of seeking roots, the idea of seeking something safe. So roots, heritage, tradition, old skills. Again, we've all seen the idea of the retro trends coming through, and maybe thought, well, why? Is it just a marketing gimmick? No, there's a very good reason why, especially the young, but to an extent, huge numbers of consumers, again, across the globe, are thinking about retro. It's because it's a safety. The idea of the past is something to hang on to. It gives us roots. It gives us something to hang on to in the midst of this volatility. You know, vintage fashion, graphics, interiors from Buenos Aires to Shanghai are taking off. People taking paper diaries, fountain pens, typewriters. Again, sales of these are going up. Cameras. You'd have thought, well, we've got cameras on our phones. Well, you know, hipstamatic cameras have taken off. Lomography, old school technology coming through. In Britain, we've seen the keep calm and carry on. I don't know who's not sick of that now, but the idea of the spirit of the Blitz in Britain. In Korea, the 70-80 trend, a revival of products from the 70s and 80s. You know, the disco revival in there in Korea. Retro restaurants with the 70s style comfort food, the Korean equivalents of Angel Delight. So across so many different markets now, we've got this sense that we want to, as consumers, want something on our roots. In terms of locality, again, thinking very much, caring very much about our locality. Again, this is where the local trend really comes from. Caring about our neighborhood. We're seeing lots of good campaigns coming through. Clean up our neighborhoods, whether that's Diageo have done one in LATAM and Nike have done one in South Africa. This idea of help clean up your own neighborhood. In terms of cities, amateur walking tours being created of people's cities from Buenos Aires to Puglia. And in terms of the people's countries, again, we're seeing both a positive and a negative on that. We're seeing you know, reverse emigration, perhaps. People from Poland, Mexico, India now coming back to their own countries. The rise of nationalist nostalgia in Russia, in Turkey, in China, the idea of looking back with fun for nationalistic. Or the darker side of that, as we've seen with the Golden Dawn in Greece. So this idea of your heritage, your local heritage, your past heritage. And then your friends, increasingly important. We're going through into the smaller and smaller groups now. Families, as we're calling them, friends becoming more like families. Very, very important. What is it? The Japanese, I think we've seen the term kizuna, which I believe means something like the bond between people, come up more and more since the tsunami. This idea of bonding between people, perhaps even more important than one-to-one relationships increasingly. We're already seeing what they call platonic dating. I don't know whether anybody's aware of this. Platonic dating, one of the next big things. The idea that using the equivalents of dating sites for meeting new friends, not just for meeting partners. Again, creating friendships. So the more that you can do in terms of promotions that can be shared or promotions that help you meet new people, again, going to be important. KLM did a great one. Meet and Seat, it's called. So you book your flight on KLM, and if you want to, not if you don't, but if you want to, you can say, well, you know, you can give them access to your Facebook and say, this is the sort of person I am, this is what I do, and they will seat you next to somebody who's said similar things. So you can actually meet people on your flight. So all of these things are starting to work. It's important to people. They've got friends. We've seen this whole idea of community coming through more and more. And then finally, within this idea of belonging, we're getting smaller and smaller, tighter and tighter families. jigsaw families as we're calling them, very different groups of families all around. Now, there's a lot of talk around the idea of single households, and they are important, but I want another trend to be thought of as well, and that is actually larger families. Is there anybody here who has teenage children? Yes? OK. Cover your ears for this next stat. This is very scary for people with teenage children. I hope you like your teenage children, because you're going to see a lot more of them. Teenage children are going to be hanging around until they're a lot older than teenage. Again, some stats for you. Almost 3/4 of German men aged 25 to 34, 25 to 34 are still living with their parents. 3/4. 2/3 of all Spanish male and female aged 18 to 29 currently living with their parents. And here's one for the UK. There are 3 times as many 25 to 34-year-olds living at home as are living on their own. So it's going to be a bigger family in terms of your child. But I've got some even worse news for you. Your parents are coming to stay. We're going to have a 3rd generation. We're starting to see this more and more. 3 generations, famwiches as they call them. So again, a bigger family. So families becoming more and more important, it will make the home more important. If you know, you've got this 3-generation family, how much more important the home is. And we're already starting to see it. More and more young people now spending less time in their bedrooms, more time around with the family in the living room. And so we're going to see TV return. There hasn't been a lot of talk about TV today. I think there should be more talk about TV. So, yeah, we'll see people sharing things. OK, and then finally, the final motive, seeking calm. We're seeing increasingly stressed. This is the final one. It's the negative side of all that technology and economy. Today, 44% of consumers globally say it's difficult to manage their daily obligations and find time to relax. 2/3 of Spanish people and almost half of all Russians find it hard to sleep because of economic worries. We've got a lot of stress out there. 50% of a knowledge worker's day is spent just managing information. We need to relax. So let's relax for a moment. When in doubt, throw in a nice picture, a relaxing picture of a kitten. There we go. Let's just look at that for a little while. That's what we need to. That's what the consumer wants to be right now. All of this stress, they want to be that little kitten. OK. So how will the consumer... Let's go back to the kitten. Look at that kitten. Anyway, how will the consumer behave? OK, so we've talked about the influences on the consumer, and so what that will drive, what motivations will tomorrow's consumer have? We've looked at those 4. OK, so the influences on them, volatility, fear, a sense of empowerment given to them by technology, but also a sense that they need to budget to have value. So those 4 motivating factors that the consumers are going to be going into tomorrow with. They're going to want calmness. They're going to want to belong. They're going to want to take control, and they're going to seek value. Those are things, as we've said, that they will want and that will motivate them to behave in a certain way. So what sort of behaviors? So will those motivators give them? So this isn't just finger in the air. This is, OK, let's look. Here's what's likely to motivate them, and let's see what that might mean. And we'll look at leisure behaviors, purchase behaviors, and media behaviors. I'm tempted to go back to the kitten. So, OK, leisure behaviors. Let's look at out of house, out of home. Community, increasingly important. We've talked about this idea of family, of friends, and so on. So more and more of our leisure behaviors are going to be communal. We're already seeing, whether it's in China and India, the growth in festivals and communal concerts and so on has grown massively and is continuing. The curve up there, growth curves are enormous. We're seeing more and more diverse communal activities, from roller derbies in the US and Brazil to communal gardening in France. Increasingly, people want things to be communal. And because of this community, this idea of sort of status today is less about status symbols and more about status updates. People now want, clearly, to be able to impress their friends, not with what they've got, but where they are. Here I am doing this. This is what I did that was unusual. So now we increasingly, for anything to do well, it needs to be unique, one-off, real-time. Any of the promotions you do, it needs to be exclusive. What I call more pleasure or multi-pleasure leisure. So don't just take somebody to the cinema, do a sing-along cinema. You know, don't just have a restaurant, have a dating restaurant, and so on. So the more that you can add, the more you can give people, the better it'll be for them in terms of the more they'll pick that up. Because these are communal, and these are things that they can show off to their friends in terms of their status updates, in terms of their social media. And retro, again, we've talked about this, retro leisure. So not just leisure you can show off with, old-fashioned leisure, that's increasingly show-offable. You know, whether they're listening and dancing to tango music in Argentina or cumbia music in Peru. Canal vaulting back in Holland, board games in China. The SS Coachella. It's a cruise, right? Coachella, the big rock festival in America. The SS Coachella is a big cruise liner that sails around, I think, South America, top of South and Central America, with rock music on. So again, very retro. Again, this platonic dating might come through, and more conservative behaviors. We've seen this as a conservative generation, haven't we? So they're likely to have less hedonistic, maybe more soft drinks, maybe behaviors that aren't so hedonistic. And then in-home, spending more time at home. I say we've got these bigger households, so there'll be more interaction. TV viewing is likely to be up. We're going to see more shared meal times. Again, these are things to think about when you're planning, when you're talking to clients. Pampering, self-pampering, the idea of going into the bathroom to escape all of this. Again, part of that relaxing idea. And health and food, which I suppose comes both in and out of home. Again, hugely important. Food becoming one of the key kind of talked about areas, one of the key social media comments. New York Times said it was a gastronomic youthquake, would you believe? Young people getting very excited about their food. Who knows why? Perhaps the way that parents taught them and so on. But a quarter of millennials claim to love cooking now. Almost a quarter of American millennials have eaten at food festivals. We're seeing food festivals for young people, not music festivals that have some food stalls, but food festivals that have a bit of music in them. Whether that's grill stock in England, koikan in Indonesia, great guga muga in America. So again, food, nature. Food and nature, these sort of things you wouldn't have thought that the cool, new, sophisticated, technological adept youth would want. Guerrilla gardening in the UK, pallet gardening in Canada, vertical gardening in Holland, retro gardening in Russia. Okay. So, purchase behaviors. What are they likely to buy? We've seen leisure behaviors. How are they likely to buy? What are they likely to buy? They're going to want things which are more human, perhaps. They're going to want things that are future-proofed. Again, they're worrying about the future. They want things that are future-proofed. They want things that are connoisseur-led. Again, they're happy to spend. They're not just looking for cheap. They want things that are good value. Already seen a third of Italians happy to spend on food at above average quantity. Wine, premium wine, up 32%. Sales of wine down 2%, but sales of premium wine up 32%. So yes, in a recession, this idea of connoisseurship. Why? Well, it's all about trust. Peer-to-peer, increasingly important. 90% of Germans regularly utilize peer reviews. 80% of Mexicans consider reviews on social media very important. In fact, 2/3 of them trust more than ads. In fact, word of mouth rose 18% since 2000, whereas trust in advertising fell 25%. This is globally. Oops. Yes. So think about that. It's going to be about brands creating a trusted area more and more, almost a brand family, if you like. So we'll talk about that. So why? They want honesty. They want, oops. So we've seen H&M Mexico have a store testing lab open to the public. They want more and more honesty. Brands want to see that. And brands, people more and more want help, as we saw from Eric today. Help with product usage, skills, and knowledge. NG's got a touring pension bus. Toyota US holds entrepreneur seminars. So again, they want this family, this trusted brand more and more. That's why they're going to buy. Where are they going to buy? They're going to buy online and offline and virtually. So online, we'll see very much about digital purchase being about necessity purchase, price-led, value, efficiency. Offline, very much about entertainment, the retail theatre. More and more you're going to need, if you've got a retail, you're going to need to create some sense of theatre around there. Virtual, already seeing this now more and more. Virtual supermarkets, trialled by Tesco in Seoul, by Walmart in Toronto, by Casino in France, and so on. The virtual store, the store where you have the walls which have got all the videos of the products, and you click your phone and you buy them. Again, so this kind of in-between online and offline, this virtual idea. And finally, how are they going to buy it? Again, virtually, by subscription more and more. Again, this is about the fear, isn't it? What will they want? They're thinking about the future. So if you have something that's a subscription, you know what you're paying. This all you can eat. Again, they know what they're paying. They don't have to worry about the future so much. And access. Not paying for products so much, but paying more and more for access to things. This is a younger generation growing up that doesn't care as much about ownership as previous generations. In fact, becoming less and less as things become more and more virtual, as DVDs become virtual and downloads and so on. Again, more and more it's going to be about access. We're going to see more and more about renting. We saw BMW earlier. Again, they were one of the first companies to really start thinking that the future of cars may be rented cars and not bought cars. Something to think about. So rental, access, subscriptions, that's how they're going to be bought. So that's how and why people are going to buy. And then media behaviors, finally. These are two things. One, we're seeing choice. It's about both and. The idea of hybrids, the idea of on-demand, increasingly important. We want lots and lots of choice. We'll want lots of choice in terms of our media behaviors, but we'll also want convenience. So we want things to be curated, to be simple, to be intuitive. Apps that can aggregate or edit information from social media, aggregate news, and so on. We'll want intuitive technology. Again, this talk of the Pebble Watch and Google Glass, this is about intuitive technology, about convenience. So more and more, we'll want media behaviors. We're going to be mixing. The consumer will want choice and convenience, so they'll have to say which is going to give, so offer them a little bit of both. And then two final little media behaviors, I think quite important to think about, pulling those out. Social leisure, social TV. The idea of, we're seeing it sort of always on. This idea that more and more technology, we're more and more connected with our technology. So we're seeing this. I'm assuming everyone's kind of aware of social TV, the idea that more and more people now are watching television and tweeting at the same time, and calling their friends at the same time, and so on. This is going to grow. This is one of the biggest areas. Again, as I say, I'm not here on behalf of anybody from TV, but believe me, 10 years ago, I thought TV was dying. I really did. I got a sense of that. But then we've really started to see more and more hints that that TV is really becoming more and more of a focus. So smart TV sales will further accelerate this trend. The more that we're able to browse online, the more we're able to have to see our friends online. It will be less about the device that's with us when we're watching TV and more about interacting with that. So we'll see that. But we'll also see not just social TV, but social other leisure behaviors. So while we're reading a book on our Kindle, we'll be able to see other people who are doing this. Kobo, for instance, is enabling us to do that. Magazine and website reading, an app like Detox allows us to talk to people who are also reading that same magazine or website as we're doing. Even in the cinema, here's a scary stat. 1/4 of Facebook users have tweeted about a film while they're watching it in the cinema. So again, we're going to want to be able to tweet about what we're doing even in the cinema. So social TV will come through. And then finally, the digi-detox. Indeed, sir. Digital detox. We're seeing, OK, so far it's all been about the idea of more and more and more technology. Very excited. But actually, we've got all this stress. Look back to the influencers at the beginning. 1 in 3 people in the UK felt so overwhelmed by communication technology they've taken steps to limit it. 55% of Indian internet users have consciously reduced the time spent on social media websites. There's a fear now that we're being overloaded, so we're going to want time away. We're not going to want to give up our phones for good, but we're going to want some time away from that. Demand for quiet and peacefulness. Everyone talks about FOMO, fear of missing out. Everyone's got to stop missing out. I'm talking about LOMO, love of missing out. We're going to start seeing this coming through, the idea wanting to be able to detox from some of this technology. We're seeing people who are using apps to stop them using technology. That's quite strange. OK, so to sum up, I'm sorry, going 5 minutes over. What are the key trends then? One of them is community, this sense of community, of wanting to get together, of getting roots. So that's about trust, about belonging, about locality, about families, about your social status and what your friends think about you. So think about that whenever you're thinking about products, about campaigns, about your clients. How can this benefit your consumer in terms of community? How can you give them a sense of more community, of trust, of belonging? Control. They want to take control. Enable them, again, as Eric said earlier, enable the consumer. Give them choice, give them customization, give them a chance to control the price. Offer them the security, the control of their own security, of knowledge. And then comfort and convenience, 2 C's there. Convenience, simplicity, relaxation for that digital detox, more humanness to combat the technology, a detoxification. So community, control, and comfort. Community, control, and comfort. These are 3 things that the consumer will be desperate for. If your client can give them that, then they're likely to buy those products. For community, build a brand family. Make your consumers feel they're part of your family. Give them things. Enable them. In terms of control, empower and assist your consumers, your customers. And in terms of comfort, smooth the journey. Thank you.